Now that they saw the two of them jumping into the arms of the same man at the same time, the atmosphere in the departure hall instantly turned sour. You must be tired. Let's go. Perhaps she was aware of everyone's gaze. Ai Xiaoxi's face was still thin. She raised her head first, looked at Jiang Hai with her little red face and quietly said to Jiang Hai, "Okay, let's go." Patting Feng Yunshan who was still leaning on him, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai say that they were leaving, Feng Yunshan also raised her head, but she still refused to leave Jiang Hai's side. Instead, she continued to hold on to Jiang Hai and followed Jiang Hai to the parking lot. Today, in order to pick up Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan didn't drive her own small sports car. Instead, she deliberately borrowed an Audi A4 from her colleague. Although this car looked very domineering with 4 queues, Jiang Hai would feel a little aggrieved sitting in this car, but there was no other way. After nestling in the car, Feng Yunshan also started the engine and headed in the direction of their home. On the way, Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi had been talking to Jiang Hai. For them, no matter what Jiang Hai's position was in their hearts, Jiang Hai was the most important. At least, Jiang Hai was the one with the largest proportion. So no matter what they wanted to say, they were willing to talk to Jiang Hai. They talked and laughed all the way. When Jiang Hai reacted, Feng Yunshan had already driven the car into their home. After the car was parked, the three of them went directly to the house Feng Yunshan bought here. This was a 2-bedroom, 1 living room in the 3rd ring road of the imperial capital. Usually, Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi lived in their own rooms, but today the rhythm was obviously different. After the three of them entered the house, Feng Yunshan didn't say anything. She first wrapped her arms around Jiang Hai's neck and opened her mouth to bite him. "Hey, you're too eager." Feeling Feng Yunshan's movements, Jiang Hai first kissed her for more than a minute before letting go. He patted Feng Yunshan's butt with a smile and said helplessly, "You had a good time in the United States. You don't know how we spent the past 2 months. We had to keep our chastity for you and suppress our needs. Now that you're back, if you don't feed me, you can't leave again." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Feng Yunshan's eyes narrowed and said with a charming face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was still a little tired because of the flight, instantly drove his tiredness aside. He looked at Ai Xiaoxi who was a little confused, and in her exclamation he picked up the 2 girls and walked into the nearest room. What happened next didn't need to be described in detail. Of course, the imperial court didn't allow it to be described in too much detail. In the blink of an eye, when Jiang Hai came to Feng Yunshan's house, it was only about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When the battle was over, it was already early evening. Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi were lying lazily in Jiang Hai's arms, one on the left and one on the right. The intoxicated expression on their faces hadn't completely faded, and they looked at Jiang Hai with such infatuation. Although Jiang Hai has a lot of problems, has a lot of lovers, is not a firm person, sometimes occasionally makes mistakes and does things a little melodramatic, but there are 2 things about him that are really likable. One is his character. Of course, character needs to be supplemented by money. The second is his combat power in this area, which really makes Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi unable to stop themselves. "You bad guy, you're getting worse and worse. Say, did you practice this thing every day when you were in the United States? Otherwise, how could it be possible for you to become bad again in just 2 months?" After patting Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan finally managed to catch her breath. "Hihi, okay, I'm a little hungry. I haven't eaten yet. Quickly think about what you want to eat." Hearing Feng Yunshan's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. There are 2 main reasons why he has become worse. One is because the Dragon Balls have been upgraded again, and the second is because, what Feng Yunshan said is also true. But Jiang Hai can't say this. No matter how stupid he is, he can't hug a girl and talk about his romantic history. How stupid is he? So Jiang Hai wisely chose to change the topic. Feng Yunshan glanced at Jiang Hai, patted Jiang Hai's shoulder, and then slowly sat up and began to tie her hair, probably because she came out earlier. Feng Yunshan was actually very independent. In the past, when she lived by herself, she could clean up, cook by herself. So now that she was sharing a room with Ai Xiaoxi, it was probably to take care of her sister. Usually when they were at home she would cook. If they went shopping, the 2 of them would buy it together. Ai Xiaoxi would wash the dishes and the like. The 2 of them would also clean up the house together. It could be said that they had a good discussion. After all, Ai Xiaoxi also came from a poor family. Although she can't cook, it's not like she can't do anything. The 2 of them get along quite well. In front of Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan tied up her hair, and then directly picked up the short-sleeved t-shirt that Jiang Hai was wearing and put it on her body. A woman wearing a man's shirt and t-shirt will always show a special charm. At this time, Feng Yunshan was the same. After wearing it, the 2 points on the top of the moon, and the faintly discernible front and back below, plus the 2 slender and straight thighs really made Jiang Hai have an impulse again. Xiaoxi, deal with him, I'm going to cook. Seeing Jiang Hai's dishonest look, Feng Yunqian wrinkled her nose at Jiang Hai, then stretched out her hand to hit Jiang Hai's lower abdomen, and then turned around and left the room. As for Ai Xiaoxi, she also got up at this time and lay on Jiang Hai's side. Seeing that she really wanted to move, Jiang Hai immediately stopped her. No, I just did it. If you do it again I will be weak. Let me rest, don't worry about it. Pulling Ai Xiaoxi up and letting her lie on his chest again, Jiang Hai said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi was like a kitten, lying on Jiang Hai's chest. To be honest, she enjoyed the time alone with Jiang Hai. Thank you very much for coming back. About a few minutes later, Ai Xiaoxi whispered to Jiang Hai's chest. Between us, there's no need to say thank you. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai went up and slapped her butt, then said with a smile. His relationship with Ai Xiaoxi is not one of saying thank you. And? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, to be honest, Ai Xiaoxi was really moved. The balance in her heart, which was swaying left and right, also deviated a little towards Jiang Hai. Maybe it's not a bad thing to find such a man. Can you tell me about our plans for the next few days? I will be returning to Bing City in November. We don't have much time. Looking at Ai Xiaoxi, who was quiet in front of him, Jiang Hai slowly stroked her back and asked her, Why are you going back to Bing City? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi raised her head and asked puzzledly. I have a friend's birthday in November. If you are free you can go together. Let's talk about our current plans. Looking at Ai Xiaoxi, Jiang Hai smiled and said to her, Okay. Hearing Jiang Hai's explanation, Ai Xiaoxi's face turned red. Originally Jiang Hai was just casually saying it, but in Ai Xiaoxi's ears, it had a different meaning. Jiang Hai. Is he going to introduce me to his friends? They were actually very clear about what Jiang Hai was doing every day. They knew that after Jiang Hai left Wuxia, he went to the Caribbean Sea and fished for tuna there. They also knew that Jiang Hai's manor bought beef again. Of course, the beef they were eating now was sent to them by Jiang Hai. After all, they were his women. After they said that they wanted to eat the beef in Jiang Hai's manor, Jiang Hai sent them a lot of beef. At least, it was enough for them to eat directly when they wanted to eat it. After talking and eating, Jiang Hai took out the 2 necklaces he bought from his backpack and handed them over. After taking the box in Jiang Hai's hand and opening it, the 2 women's eyes lit up instantly. Jiang Hai gave Ai Xiaoxi the necklace with the pearl seal as the base and the diamond inlaid necklace because this necklace was the most dazzling. It was also the most suitable age for Ai Xiaoxi. Although she was now with Jiang Hai, she was still only 21 years old. The necklace for Feng Yunqian was the platinum diamond necklace, and the broken diamond necklace was prepared for Qi Li. Although they were all made of the same material, the style and workmanship were completely different. The latter was more mediocre while the former was more dazzling. Women were like birds, they had no resistance to these sparkling things. After seeing these 2 necklaces, the 2 women did not ask for the price. They directly picked them up and admired them in their hands. Compared to Ai Xiaoxi, who was still hesitant, Feng Yunqian was much more generous. Her position was a mistress, so naturally she had to have the awareness of being a mistress. She directly wore it on her neck and showed it to Jiang Hai. Does it look good? Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her with a satisfied look, Feng Yunqian said with a smile. Of course. Hearing Jiang Hai's affirmation, Feng Yunqian also smiled and touched it. Although their income in this line of work may not be ideal, after all, not everyone will sacrifice their body for money. But their vision will not have a problem. She recognized that this was the brand of Tiffany. This brand didn't have many luxury stores in the country. Most of them were Cartier or Swarovski and so on. Of course, this refers to the top jewelry brands. The average girl has a Cartier watch and wears a Swarovski pendant, which is enough to kill everything. The 2 brands, Bulgari and Tiffany, are indeed not well known in China. Except for some top socialites, the average girl does not know much about these 2 brands. But fortunately, Feng Yunqian was not an ordinary girl. She knew that this necklace must be expensive. She did not know how much it was worth in the United States, but in China, it was absolutely impossible to get it without more than 1 million. Although a man spending money for a woman does not show his absolute sincerity, this is also a measure of sincerity. But if you came here to play, the only place to see was Lugong Island, and that was it. If you came here to eat seafood and take a bath, it was indeed a good place and the prices were cheap. But if you came here to see history and culture, then you might have come to the wrong place. But other than that, Wei City was also a good place to shop. This was because Wuxia was the closest place to Japan and South Korea. That's why many Japanese and South Korean shops were opened here. They not only sold food but they also sold a lot of products from Wuxia. Actually, these products were also from China, but they were labeled with Wuxia's brand. But even so, these products were much cheaper than other places. For example, fishing rods were much cheaper here than other places in China. The same carbon fishing rod was sold for 80 renminbi in Wei City, and it was accompanied by a full set of fishing rods, hooks, lines, etc. But the same fishing rod in Bing City would be sold for 150 renminbi, and in Sichuan, it would be sold for 270 renminbi. This was the difference. That's why it was not a bad idea to buy some fishing rods and bring them back. After all, Ai Xiaoxi didn't have Jiang Hai's spirit. After talking with Jiang Hai for a while and looking at the scenery outside, she felt sleepy. She fell asleep in a daze. Jiang Hai just let her lean on him and sat there the whole time. 6 hours passed by quickly. As the sky darkened, the train slowly entered the train station in Wei City. When the train was about to enter the station, Jiang Hai shook Ai Xiaoxi gently to wake her up. He then took his luggage and alighted from the train. At the train station, he hailed a taxi and went straight to Wei City's two best hotels, Golden Bay Hotel. After alighting from the taxi, they booked a room for Jiang Hai and Feng Yunqian. This time Jiang Hai did not bother about extravagance. It was just a normal room with a king-sized bed. After entering the room, they left their luggage there and went for a buffet. After returning to the room, they took a shower. As they had been on the train for a few hours, Jiang Hai was fine. But Ai Xiaoxi was exhausted, and Jiang Hai did not continue to torture her. Instead, he hugged her and went to sleep. That night was probably the best sleep Xiaoxi had ever had in her life. That was because the man she loved was hugging her as he slept beside her. Besides, there was no other woman in the room other than her. The next morning when the sun shone into the room, both of them woke up. Good morning. When Jiang Hai opened his eyes, Ai Xiaoxi was looking at him with her big eyes blinking. Good morning? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. Although he and Aphrodite had already done some things that shouldn't have been done, this was the first time a woman said good morning to him when he woke up in the morning. This made Jiang Hai a little emotional. He hugged Ai Xiaoxi and Jiang Hai pulled her into his embrace. As for Jiang Hai, while dealing with Ai Xiaoxi's mother, he was also looking around the small courtyard. This small courtyard wasn't considered small. It was about 400 to 500 square meters. In the small courtyard, there were 2 single-story houses arranged in an L shape. There was also a huge courtyard. In the corner of the courtyard there was a small vegetable garden. It could be seen that the vegetables were picked from there. In the courtyard there were also many tools used by carpenters. There were even some shavings on it now. It seemed that Ai Xiaoxi's father was still doing something in the afternoon. Ai Xiaoxi's house wasn't completely in the countryside. As mentioned earlier, it was considered an urban-rural area. However, the people here mainly made a living by farming. Of course, Ai Xiaoxi's house didn't have much land. Her father was a carpenter, so he usually made a living by doing carpentry. In the nearby villages, her father's craftsmanship was indispensable for all the weddings and funerals. Her father's craftsmanship was indeed very strong. He could make all kinds of cabinets, beds, windows, and even beams. His craftsmanship was quite good. But now, when new houses were being built, they basically used reinforced concrete. For the time being, there was no need to use wood for beams. This place was very close to the sea. If wood was used, it would be very corrosive. Therefore, for many years, her father hadn't accepted such a business. Only last year there was a house building a warehouse. The warehouse didn't need good materials, so he was prepared to buy wood to make a beam. When he went to the beam, he slipped and fell from the roof. Although he was fine, his leg was broken. This was the beginning of the Ai family's nightmare. But now, although he was still somewhat affected when he walked, Ai Xiaoxi's father could move freely. This was indeed a good thing for the Ai family. He followed Ai Xiaoxi's family into the room in the middle. The layout of Ai Xiaoxi's house was somewhat similar to the layout of the city. Of course, one couldn't expect the houses in the countryside to be as clean as the houses in the city. But the floor was tiled. There was a big sofa in the living room. It seemed to be made by Ai Xiaoxi's father. Because although the style was a little old, it was unusually sturdy. There was a big old TV opposite the sofa. At this time, a certain program was playing on the screen run Bar Buddy. Jiang Hai looked over and saw that the whole house was bright and clean. After putting these things next to the kitchen table in the living room, Jiang Hai was pulled to the sofa by Ai Xiaoxi's father. You guys go ahead and chat. Xiaoxi and I will cook. Shall we come and help? Seeing Jiang Hai sit down, AI Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but smile. Then she pulled AI Xiaoxi into the kitchen. As for AI Xiaowei, who had already sat down, he couldn't help but shake his head and stand up. As parents, especially after they got older, no one was willing to let their children be too far away from them. Although he still had a son at home, their daughter was going to be so far away. They didn't feel comfortable in their hearts. But as the saying goes, children and grandchildren have their own blessings. They couldn't care so much as long as their daughter was willing to go. Well, it's on the other side of the world. But it's convenient now. It's only a dozen hours by plane. If you have time, Uncle and Andy can come to my place. My place is pretty good. Hearing AI Xiaoxi's father's words, Jiang Hai touched his nose. He wasn't stupid, so he naturally understood. But his roots were there and he couldn't be brazen about it. Well, speaking of raising cows, don't look at me as someone who has never raised one before. There are many people in the surrounding villages who raise cows. Xiaoxi's second uncle's family raises cows. They raise a total of 5 cows. Each cow produces milk and can earn more than 10,000 yuan a year. The profits from these things are still very rich. Although he had some knowledge of Jiang Hai's work, how should he put it? He wasn't very satisfied, but since it was Jiang Hai's first time here, AI Xiaoxi's father couldn't say too much. So after pondering for a while, he took the initiative to change the topic. Well, yes, cows are quite profitable. In fact, it wasn't only domestic cows that were valuable. Naturally, overseas cows were also valuable. The so-called cows, the kind with black and white flowers, were called Dutch cows. This kind of cows could be found all over the world. Beef cattle might be divided into different grades, but generally speaking, cows weren't too different. This was because they were basically Dutch cows. Although many cows were also used for meat, labor, and milk, or both, their milk was indeed a little inferior compared to Dutch cows. Now he was a little tired of eating them and wanted to try the taste of these home-cooked dishes. Come, let's eat. Don't look at the food. Even if you look, it won't enter your stomach. Xiaojiang, you don't have to be so polite here. Treat it as your own home. Looking at the food, Jiang Hai was really hungry. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested in her dishes, AI Xiaoxi's mother was also very happy. As a cook, there was nothing happier than seeing someone like her cooking. After everyone sat down, AI Xiaoxi's mother started to instruct everyone to eat. AI Xiaoxi's brother went to the fridge and took out a few bottles of beer. People from Lu province also liked to drink beer. It was similar to the people in Bing City. The brand of beer was also Lu province's local brand, Green City. Jiang Hai had drunk this brand of beer in the past. The taste was not bad and he could accept it. Jiang Hai opened the beer and poured it into a glass. After everyone drank a glass, Jiang Hai couldn't wait to pick up his chopsticks and eat a clam. Clams were actually a kind of shellfish. People who didn't live in the coastal areas or didn't eat seafood often didn't know much about this kind of food. However, people who often ate seafood wouldn't be unfamiliar with this kind of food. There were 3 kinds of clams. The biggest and most expensive was the yellow clam, followed by the flowery clam and the white clam. Compared to the yellow clam, the flowery clam and the white clam were much cheaper. They were sold in some restaurants in Lian City. Flower clams were sold at 1 renminbi per 500 grams. Of course, there was a limited supply. But even if one were to buy it, it would not cost more than 3 renminbi. Flower clams could also be found in the Atlantic Ocean, but Jiang Hai and the rest did not eat a lot of them. Now that he had eaten this clam, it tasted pretty good. The only problem was that it was slightly salty. Shandong cuisine was salty, and because AI Xiaoxi's family lived in the urban-rural area, the people there would cook salty dishes. First, it was because the salty dishes could be stored for a long time, and they were not afraid of spoiling. Secondly, it was because they needed to work, so eating salty food would give them strength. As for health, in their opinion, it wasn't very important. Therefore, when Jiang Hai ate it, it was a bit too salty. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, AI Xiaoxi couldn't help but smile. She was also a bit confused just now. She forgot to tell her mother to make the dishes a bit lighter. It seems that Jiang Hai couldn't stand it anymore. Come, have some soup. Seeing Jiang Hai's chopsticks slow down, AI Xiaoxi took the initiative to serve Jiang Hai a bowl of soup. Then she smiled and said to Jiang Hai. After drinking a mouthful of soup, Jiang Hai looked at AI Xiaoxi and gave her a gratified look. At least the soup was not too salty. Fine, I'll consider you ruthless. I hope you can always be this ruthless. Don't run away with your tail between your legs. Just you wait. Second, you actually helped an outsider beat up your own brother. From today onwards, Don't blame me for not caring about brotherhood. You're going to be unlucky. At this time, Ai Xiaoxi's third uncle stood up while holding his waist, and then said to Jiang Hai with a face full of anger. Of course, this was just a clamor before leaving. Jiang Hai took a step forward and scared the 4 people. Then, with the help of the other 4 people, he left Ai Xiaoxi's house with his tail between his legs. Watching the 4 people leave, Jiang Hai also turned his head and threw the box of cigarettes on the coffee table. But at this time, the lively dinner table became quiet. That little Jiang, I'm really sorry that you had to see this scene. Seeing Jiang Hai looking over, Ai Xiaoxi's mother couldn't help but wipe her hands and said somewhat embarrassedly. It was said that dirty linen should not be aired in public, but now, it's okay. Every family has a few bad relatives. It's okay. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's mother's words, Jiang Hai hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile that it's okay. But after hearing his words, Ai Xiaoxi's parents and her brother still frowned. Only Ai Xiaoxi didn't take it to heart because her parents didn't know how powerful Jiang Hai was. But she knew, so she wasn't worried at all whether it was official or private. At this time she was still eating, minding her own business. For the rest of the meal, everyone obviously had no appetite. Jiang Hai couldn't eat because it was too salty. Ai Xiaoxi's parents and brother couldn't eat because of this incident. How much could Ai Xiaoxi eat? There were a lot of dishes left on the last table. After dinner, Ai Xiaoxi's mother asked Ai Xiaoxi and Jiang Hai to go out for a walk and enjoy the scenery here, while they cleaned up the table. Ai Xiaoxi's mother was very happy. Then at around 8:30 Ai Xiaoxi left with Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi. Each of them carried a small bucket with some tools in it. There were a total of 4 tools. One looked like a hook used to make a fire in winter when they lived in a bungalow when they were young, a small curved shovel, a very sharp awl like a screwdriver, and a very thin kite string. These 4 tools had their own uses. The hook was used to hook things such as the small crabs they wanted to catch. When the crabs got into the reef cave, they had to use this thing to pull them out. The small curved shovel was used to catch razor clams that got into the beach. The small shovel was used to dig out the shellfish attached to the reef. The last one was used to tie the crabs after catching them. Otherwise, these crabs might run out of the bucket and all their efforts would be in vain. After everything was ready, Jiang Hai and the others went to the beach on the east side of the village. Because there were a lot of reefs and rocks on the beach, they couldn't walk barefoot on it. If they were not careful, they would cut their feet. Jiang Hai and the others walked with shoes on. When they came over, there were already some people on the beach here. It seems that today was the Mid-Autumn Festival, so there were a lot of villagers who came to gather seafood. Jiang Hai and the others found a slightly remote place and walked up. Now that the sea had just begun to recede, most of the sand hadn't been exposed yet. So their initial goal was still the reef. Chapter 577. This thing is called sea rainbow and it tastes good after cooking. Looking at the dense black shells on the reef, Ai Xiaoxi explained to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also started digging, because he had seen this thing before. Sea rainbow, its scientific name is mussel, is a very common shellfish in China. It can also be said that it is one of the cheapest seafood besides flower clams. Basically, it is only a few RMB per 500 kilograms. In Bing City, it can be sold for 5 renminbi per 500 kilograms. This kind of shellfish was very fat and tasted good. It was very nutritious. Although the best kind of shellfish was more expensive than the average sea rainbow, it was not particularly expensive. This kind of creature did not have a shell when it was first born, so it could move freely. But when it meets a suitable environment, it will start to live on rocks or other hard things. They lived a fixed life for the rest of their lives, so reefs and the like were the best choices for them. Looking at the shells in front of him, Jiang Hai, to be honest, had not eaten for a long time. He also began to dig with a small shovel. This thing was very hard, so it was not easy to dig it out. However, Jiang Hai's divine strength was invincible. In less than half an hour he had dug almost half a bucket. Seeing him digging so much, Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaohui immediately stopped Jiang Hai. Under Jiang Hai's puzzled gaze, Ai Xiaoxi could not help but roll her eyes at him. Why are you digging so much? We are here to catch razor clams and crabs. These things can be found at any time. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai could not help but touch his nose. Yes, this kind of food is very common and not expensive. So the 3 of them stopped and picked up Jiang Hai's half bucket of sea rainbow. They kept the big ones and threw away the small ones. But even so, there is still about 1/3 of the bucket left. Together with the other 2, there is about 10 kilograms of sea rainbow. At this moment, the seawater on the surface of the sea also receded. Jiang Hai and the AI siblings also stepped onto the sandy beach and began to look for their main dish today, those crabs and other delicious things. Soon AI Xiaowei made a discovery. After a shout, he directly used the curved shovel to stab into the sand. When it was pulled out, it brought out a lot of sand, but in the middle of the sand, there was a long pale yellow shellfish. Wow, what a big one! Looking at the shellfish, Jiang Hai immediately ran towards it and removed the sand from its body. Then he picked it up. It was a razor clam. Jiang Hai wasn't unfamiliar with it. Bing City also likes to eat this thing, and that's why they usually call it Shaorin Xian. Compared to normal shellfish, this type of razor clam is bigger and has more meat. Its shell is also thinner and does not need to be weighed. That's why it is very popular in the seafood market. This is a bamboo razor clam. It's the biggest one among all the razor clams. This one is about 12 centimeters long. It seems like this piece of bamboo razor clam is quite good. After taking the razor clam from Jiang Hai, AI Xiaowei smiled and washed it with seawater. Then he threw it into his bucket and explained to Jiang Hai. Then he explained to Jiang Hai how to find the razor clams. But according to him, Jiang Hai searched several places but didn't find any. Instead, it was the AI siblings, AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowei, who found a lot of these things. Before long, they had already found 5 or 6 genes. Seeing that he really didn't have the talent to catch razor clams, Jiang Hai looked at other things. After high tide, there would always be a large number of creatures on the beach. There were all kinds of things. In addition to all kinds of shellfish, there were also small fish, shrimps, starfish and so on. It can be said that all the small creatures in the sea would rush up here. Jiang Hai couldn't deal with the razor clams under the beach, but dealing with the creatures on the beach wasn't a problem. It didn't take long for Jiang Hai to pick up a lot of shellfish and 2 starfish. Jiang Hai couldn't eat these starfish. Most people wouldn't be able to eat them, but it was still good to play with them. Looking at the tentacles of this thing, Jiang Hai thought. If people with trypophobia saw this, they would be scared and break out in a cold sweat. This thing was indeed a trap. Just as Jiang Hai was happily picking up things, he accidentally kicked away a stone. Then a crab the size of a child's fist suddenly jumped out from under the stone. Seeing this thing, Jiang Hai's spirit was lifted. He didn't forget his purpose for coming here. It wasn't for these small shells but for the crab. Jiang Hai's speed was much faster than this crab. He stretched out his body and instantly pulled one of the crab's legs. However, this crab was wild and fierce. When its leg was pulled, it instantly turned its body and its 2 huge pincers tried to clamp Jiang Hai's hand. However, Jiang Hai's speed was faster. He instantly threw it away. When he caught it, he had already pinched its shell with 2 fingers. This time it didn't have a chance to clamp Jiang Hai. Look, I caught a crab. Can this be eaten? Holding the crab, Jiang Hai said to AI Xiaoxi and AI Xiaowei in the distance. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the siblings also rushed over. After approaching, AI Xiaoxi clearly saw the appearance of the crab and said to Jiang Hai, "Oh, this is a sand crab. Can be eaten. You're really good. This little thing runs very fast." Sand crab can be said to be a very ancient crab. It originated in the Cretaceous period, the same dynasty as the dinosaurs. It developed and grew in the 3rd era. Now this kind of crab can be found all over the world. In Wuxia there are more than 70 kinds. Brother-in-law, continue to work hard. We will catch the razor clams. We will leave the crab to you. Seeing Jiang Hai catch a crab so easily, AI Xiaowei was very excited and said with a happy face. With his physical fitness, he couldn't catch a crab except for using his hands. So when he came, he didn't plan to catch any crabs. But now Jiang Hai could easily catch it with his bare hands. This made his eyes light up. This was an unexpected gain. No problem. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. With the help of AI Xiaoxi, he tied up the crab with a rope. Then Jiang Hai no longer cared about the small shells on the beach and began to turn over the stones. It turned out that there were indeed a lot of crabs here. After turning over the stones, they often came out early. Basically, after turning over 3 or 5 stones, a sand crab would come out and escape. However, Jiang Hai let go of the small ones. He only caught the bigger ones. But even so, it didn't take long for Jiang Hai to catch a lot of sand crabs. These small crabs ran very fast, but Jiang Hai was faster. In terms of speed, these small crabs were still a little worse. However, just as Jiang Hai was happily catching the crabs, he suddenly turned over a stone and found that there was a crab under the stone. But unlike the sand crabs he caught, this crab was bluish-black and had a particularly big claw. After seeing Jiang Hai, it didn't escape like the sand crabs. Instead, it raised its pincers as if it wanted to fight with Jiang Hai. Hey, what kind of game is this? Looking at the crab in front of him, Jiang Hai directly stretched out his hand and picked it up. He looked at it carefully. It looked so strange. One pincer was big and the other was small. It also seemed to have some aggressive tendencies. What the hell is this? This is a fiddler crab. It's also a type of sand crab, but it has a different classification. It's also edible. Just as Jiang Hai was feeling a little strange, Ai Xiaoxi also came over. Looking at the small crab in Jiang Hai's hand, she couldn't help but smile and explain to Jiang Hai. At this time her small bucket was almost half filled with razor clams. It was about 5 or 6 pounds. She didn't need to catch too many. After all, Ai Xiaoxi was still catching. So after seeing some gains, she came to Jiang Hai's side and was responsible for helping Jiang Hai tie up the crabs. Although these crabs weren't big, it would be troublesome if they escaped. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded. He knew another species. Although Jiang Hai had a manor and a fishing ground, he didn't know many crabs. Except for the swimming crabs he used to eat, he knew very little about crabs. He only knew about spider crabs, king crabs and river crabs in his manor. He had seen all kinds of crabs before, especially sand crabs. They could be found all over the world. But he didn't think about eating them before, so he didn't want to know more about them. Now that he looked at them, there were a lot of crabs. After helping Ai Xiaoxi tie up the crab, Jiang Hai continued to search. After finding the first fiddler crab, Jiang Hai found a few more fiddler crabs. But most of them were sand crabs. But after searching for a while, he found another kind of crab. This is a big-eyed crab. Looking at the crab that Jiang Hai picked up, it was obviously bigger than the sand crab and the fiddler crab. Ai Xiaoxi also introduced it to him. Although Ai Xiaoxi was now living in the imperial capital, this was the place where she grew up. She was very familiar with every blade of grass, every tree, every living thing and every species here. Maybe she couldn't name them, but she could accurately know what they were called in the local language. It was said that working together was less tiring, especially when Jiang Hai was quite interested in this matter. Unknowingly, his bucket was filled with crabs. Ai Xiaoxi's bucket was also filled with a lot of crabs. Sister, brother-in-law, it's almost time to go back. Just as Jiang Hai and Ai Xiaoxi were happily catching crabs, Ai Xiaoxi's voice sounded. Only then did they notice that they had been catching seafood for more than 3 hours. At this time, it was already 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Just now he was so focused on catching that he didn't feel hungry. Now looking at the time, the 2 bowls of noodles that Jiang Hai ate in the morning had already been digested. Looking at his harvest, Jiang Hai's face was brimming with a proud smile. The so-called yellow was the seed of the crab. The male crab was called cream, and the female crab was called yellow. But it was hard to distinguish. In this season, both male and female crab were present. But since this was mentioned, then let's just say something. The female crab was yellow, which referred to the female crab's ovaries. The seeds inside were the small crabs. As for the male crab's cream, some things were like red wine and noodles in Shaanxi province. It was delicious if you didn't want to eat it directly. But once you thought about it, you couldn't eat it. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had already overcome this in his heart. He didn't care about eating this thing. After all, he was most willing to eat kidney in the past. It wasn't like he hadn't eaten bombs before, so his resistance to this was slightly stronger. These small crabs, although small, were indeed very fat now. If they were cooked and eaten with meat, there wouldn't be much left. But after being fried and stuffed into his mouth and chewing, the taste was really incomparable. The outside was crispy and the meat inside was soft and smooth. Together with the yellow stuff, he didn't know if it was cream or yellow. The taste of flour, the taste of yellow, and the taste of meat made him subconsciously move his chin to chew. The more he chewed, the more delicious and fragrant it was. The more he chewed, the more flavorful it was. While eating these small crabs and drinking wine, the moon was already high in the sky. When Jiang Hai came back to his senses, the plate of fried crabs was already finished. He had to admit that the Mid-Autumn Festival in September was a good time to eat seafood. If I knew that little Jiang liked to eat, I would have fried more. We have enough here. Looking at Jiang Hai eating almost all the small crabs in the pot, Ai Xiaoxi's mother smiled and said, "It's not that bad. They could eat these small crabs often here, so they had already eaten enough." This was especially true for the siblings, Ai Xiaoxi and Ai Xiaohui. When they were young, they would often catch these small crabs and ask their mother to fry them. These were the best snacks back then, so now they only had a taste of 2 crabs. They had already had enough of them. Ai Xiaoxi's parents were already sick of eating them, so more than 90% of the 4 to 5 caddies of crabs in the plate went into Jiang Hai's stomach. On the other hand, Jiang Hai tasted the dishes cooked by Ai Xiaoxi's mother a few times, But he didn't eat too much. This was because these small crabs were too delicious for Jiang Hai. He planned to learn it, and then when he went back he would catch some small crabs and cook them. The small crabs in his manner would definitely taste better. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think about catching some small crabs back tomorrow. Let's catch some more tomorrow. These small crabs are really delicious,